Hello, everyone. This is Revolution and GTA, and I'm Stefan Bertram, and this is Philosophy for the People with Ben Burgis. Please do tell me if I'm looking too orange or just about the right amount of orange, because I've been playing with my camera settings, which I've just learned exist. Ben, at the end of the essay this week, which is consistent time travel in movies. Oh, I played the wrong intro, lol.
Yeah.
Damn. Oh well. Um, at the end of this week's essay, you said something about a taste for the desert landscape,
Yeah.
about ridding your picture of the world of unnecessary clutter.
hmm
Um, and that really reminded me of the closest thing I've ever had to a religious experience, which is when I stopped believing in God.
Yeah.
Um, I read something by Derren Brown, the English magician, where he basically pointed out that, like, well, there's not really any obvious evidence for God, is there? And I was like, oh, there's not really, is there? And then stopped believing God on the spot as an 11-year-old.
Wow. It's, sometimes that's all it takes.
So, what's the essay about this week, then?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm still thinking about adolescent Stefan's instantaneous
Yeah, and I really believed in God before then.
yeah. It's like the metaphysical equivalent of the most ridiculous thing about the Star Wars movies, which is that characters go from being completely good to becoming completely evil or vice versa, like on a dime, just instantly. You know, And, you could be, um, you could be Darth Vader, and it's you know, your son almost died, pulls on your heartstrings, for like half a second, be like, I'm good now, right? That's you
It
know,
also happened in Europe's largest shopping mall,
yeah, the
where
best place for religious experiences of all kinds,
where
epiphanies
as
and
a
Satori moments and whatnot.
I
Uh,
would I would get my mother to buy me a book, and then I would walk around the shopping mall as she went shopping like this.
I think we were
I know she
probably
was quite common among our audience.
I was going to say, I think we were probably relatively similar 11-year-olds. Um, yeah, well, something else that I was into when I was 11 that I thought about while I was writing this was Back to the Future. I remember that the second Back to the Future movie came out when I was 9. It would have been in 1989. And I remember being very excited about being taken to the theater to see it. And I also talk in the essay about going to about watching at that point what had been for the first time in many years. Watching the first Back to the Future movie again in my late 20s as a philosophy graduate student, watching it with other graduate students. Um, I was probably pretty high. I don't really remember. And I being like really intensely struck by the nonsensicalness of how this universe worked. That what really hit me was that Michael J. Fox character, Marty McFly, in the movie has this family photo. He's standing with his brother and his sister, who more or less disappear from the franchise after this. Not totally, but and and every time he does something in the past that drives his parents further apart, the family photo starts to fade away. And then
Wow.
every time he did, at one point, his own hand starts to fade away, but mostly it's just the photo. And every time he does something that
And
brings him
that indicates some very squishy metaphysics.
well, this is what I really wanted to know at the time. I remember when I was watching this again in my 20s, which was, hold up. There's a moment where he takes out the photo and he's messed things up so badly in 1955, that it's, brought his parents further apart, all this, that the photo is so faded out that only about like the left half of his brother is still there. And I really wanted to know, okay, So let's say he hops back in the DeLorean right there and then, and there's an issue with the power and whatever. I've seen the movie, but he solves the transportation issue somehow. He he gets back in the DeLorean right there and then, stops interfering in the past at that exact moment. Then he comes back to 1985, and half of his brother is waiting for him. I'm so curious about how the rules work here. Um, and look, I still love Back to the Future. Remember watching it a few years after that time, with my then wife, and we were, watching it then, I think through less grad student-y eyes. She hadn't seen it, and which appalled me. And it's like, all right, this is an important gap. Everybody needs to watch Back to the Future. Um, you know, I think the sort of dreamy fairy tale logic of the whole thing worked for me a little bit better the second time. Well, not second time around. It's like the 20th time around, but second time
Right.
around as an adult.
Various
And
times at Christmas on whatever the American equivalent to BBC Three is.
yeah, exactly. Uh, and um, and so it did really, it did really bother me, but this did kind of set up for me thinking about what I was actually writing about for the essay, which is why I've kind of really come to appreciate those time travel movies that actually make sense. So that in this very basic way that most time travel movies don't make sense, and this is something that I,
And to be clear, you're only really making a problem with like one specific metaphysical thing of kind of like timelines. The
yeah,
fact that it's all completely physically impossible doesn't even get mentioned.
yeah. I mean, it might be. It certainly seems like something that's impossible in the sense. Well, it sort of gets mentioned at the very top, like. Um, but yeah, I mean, whether there's any way that it would be physically possible is an interesting question. It's certainly, if you think about, kind of three levels of impossibility. There's logical impossibility, which is the most impossible that anything could be. Like I uh, teaching in-person classes, I would always do this thing where we're talking about this, where I'd ask for a volunteer to come draw something on the board, and then I would tell them to draw a round square. And sometimes they would sort of gamely draw something that was sort of roundish and sort of squarish. And sometimes they just stand there and be like, well, I can't do that. And, it's all right. Well, we're not going to judge you too harshly for your failure to do this, because it would be logically impossible to draw something that was both literally round and literally a square, right? That's
You
logically
know,
impossible.
the guy that invented the many worlds interpretation of quantum
Mm.
mechanics, he did that as a grad student, and it was because his grad advisor had told him to quantize gravity, something that we still haven't done.
Ugh.
But I just like the idea of him being assigned a completely impossible task, but failing, but still coming up with one of the most important kind of theoretical
Right.
innovations of the mid 20th century in physics.
Yeah, as far as I know, none of those losers ever did anything that impressive, but with their failed
They didn't even
assignment.
square the circle, the morons.
Exactly. So that's, the most impossible, and then physically impossible, like, accelerated faster than the speed of light, um, is, middle impossible, and then a hardly impossible at all. But while we're still talking about, metaphysically impossible kind of impossibility, is with, the kind of impossibility that you would say, if I claimed to have in my backyard a spaceship that, I wasn't going to say it could accelerate faster than the speed of light, but it could travel at like 99.9% of the speed of light, you would say that's impossible. Meaning not that it would violate any laws of physics or anything, but just that, it would be impossible given current technology or something like that. It would be impossible in the
I mean,
sense of
it is
I
kind of
couldn't
funny.
have it because nobody's figured out how to do it.
Yeah, it is kind of funny that lots of time fuckery is completely possible in our universe, and kind of time fuckery that conventionally seems like people can't. Like the idea of what do you call it, the twin paradox, which isn't a paradox, is just kind of a fact about the universe we
Yeah,
live in.
just a weird fact. Yeah.
Like basically, if a twin accelerates off at 0.9 c to an arbitrary point far away, then comes back at the same speed, there'll be a very different age then they're twin on Earth and they come back. So there
Yeah.
is lots of weird time stuff in the universe, and maybe there's even closed timeline curves where you can
Hmm.
basically go on a space time path and end up back where you started. Um, but yeah, time travel, as in movies, probably physically impossible, but
Yeah,
also
probably. I mean,
as
certainly, you know, and although, the twin paradox, got to remember there's the groundbreaking work done by Dr. Dana Scully in her thesis, the twin paradox, a new interpretation, is the brought up in the first episode of the X Files. That Mulder's been researching her backstory, and she wrote this. But yeah, that's it's quite possibly physically impossible. Somebody in the chat says Sabine Hossenfelder thinks it's possible. I don't know. I don't have a view on that. I think that it's.
she
I
doesn't
would be
even believe
very
in free will, so
well, there you go. I would be very unsurprised if it was physically impossible. One thing I feel fairly confident about is that it will be is that it will forever be technologically impossible. In other words, even if it is physically impossible, it doesn't seem like anybody's ever going to figure out how to do it.
well,
For
and,
which,
and it seems like they already haven't, right? Because
yeah,
unless
exactly.
we live in a
Because if
particularly
they
boring time,
if they had
um,
figured out how to do it, where are the time travelers?
yeah,
That's so, and certainly it won't be the case that there's like a long time in the future when lots of people have this technology because, we would have run into some of them. So yeah, so I think it's definitely at least a little bit impossible. It's definitely at least impossible in that sense that like probably whether or not it violates any laws of physics, probably at least nobody's gonna be able to figure out how to do it at any point in the future. And so there is a sort of awkward question of self-justification raised at the beginning of the essay, which is like, all right, man, this is the second thing I've devoted to time travel in here. There was a
yeah.
essay.
Ben gave another mea culpa in this essay, being like, "You might not think this is interesting, but I'm writing it."
um, yeah. So the first one was about time travel paradoxes, which we could get into. I also don't think those are very paradoxical. I think they're just kind of the same thing. I think it's just weird. But and then and
I
then
was gonna read that one also today, but I opened it and it's now locked or whatever. And I was like, I could just message Ben and get him to ask me to send it to me. Sounds like I'll actually just go and play video games.
yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think the executive summary you get of that one and this one is probably fine for our purposes today. But yeah, it's the so one of the things, and I also this one today is much more accessible than that one is, because that one's really like a deep dive into the academic literature and time travel paradoxes, and this is the why I sort of felt the need for the mea culpa, because I could sort of imagine the reaction some people would have to the phrase academic literature on time travel paradoxes, and I get where they're coming from, but this one is much more accessible because it's about a sort of more basic issue, and it's all tied into thinking about time travel movies. But one of the reasons this is interesting to me is certainly autobiographically. I know that this is one of the first issues that kind of got me to
Hmm.
think philosophically about that issue. In other words, sort of like reasoning in this abstract way about what's possible and what's not possible and all of that. And I suspect that I'm not alone in that, right? In other words, that it's like there are probably lots of people who, like me, had thought about this particular sort of philosophical puzzle. It's okay. Can you change the past? Does that even make sense? Before they knew who, I don't know, Descartes or Hegel or whoever was, or certainly had ever set foot in a college philosophy class, or if you're the kind of weird rich kid who has a high school philosophy class before they ever set foot in that, they just because, just for the very simple reason that this is, unlike most of the other things we've been talking about here, this is a puzzling conceptual issue that comes up in the plots of lots of movies.
And your basic point is to say there isn't some special magical reason that if you managed to travel back in time, you couldn't have killed Hitler. rather just we already know that you didn't. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
unless you did it on like May 4th, 1945, in which case you're a bit of a fucking idiot.
Yeah, that's the in the earlier essay, I actually drew out this whole scenario whereby somebody could have actually killed Hitler. It's just that
Right.
they kept being foiled, and they only finally succeeded in the bunker
Right.
at the bitter end, which you know. So you could in that sense, but that's not what most people mean when they say, "Could you go back and kill Hitler?" Similarly, you could go back and kill your grandfather whenever he actually died. You just didn't realize that what he died of was you. Um, but again, that's not what people mean. They mean, could you have killed your grandfather before he becomes your grandfather? And I think the only sense in which you couldn't have is the extremely uninterested sense of could, in which somebody would be like, oh, is it possible? I can't find Stefan. Is it possible Stefan's in the library right now? And so he says, no, I checked every single floor, right, and they're not there. So no. That's like can't, in the sense of it's like incompatible with some stuff that we know about the situation, but there's no deeper level of can't that's like metaphysical in which you can't. So
An
people who
angel isn't going to reach down and stop you.
yeah, exactly. There's no angel of history that's gonna say, prevent paradoxes, by
The world
stopping you.
spirit isn't going to stop you.
Yeah, exactly. That it's just so one way. Something I said in the earlier essay, way of thinking about this is, uh, here's like a non-time travel example. Imagine that somewhere in an attic in Berlin, you found this old film reel of that actually caught on film an attempt to assassinate Hitler in 1932 or whatever. And so in the reel, you can see the guy, setting up on the grassy knoll, near where Hitler is speaking, and he's, setting up his rifle and aiming and all that stuff. And then the film cuts out, probably just because it's been poorly preserved in an attic for all these decades, and you don't know what happened. Now, assuming that you think this is authentic footage, you don't think this is staged, um, you would be a priori certain that this attempt was not successful. That either the assassin had a change of heart at the last moment, or they were tackled by guards at the last moment, or there was the something malfunctioned and the gun or whatever. You don't know exactly what, but something must have stopped them, because that Hitler didn't die in 1932. And in exactly the same way, if I don't know, your friend who just got a DeLorean with a flux capacitor announced their intention to you to kill Hitler in 1932, um, and you thought about it in the way they had it, you'd be able to say, I know that you're not going to do that successfully. And it's not that it's not because there's some weird metaphysical fact that's going to stop you. It's that like, time doesn't want to be changed, or, any kind of nonsense like that. It's just that we know that if your friend goes ahead with his attempt, we know that it's not successful, because we know Hitler didn't die in 1932. So, if this attempt happened, something must have happened to stop it from succeeding. Just whatever mundane thing would ever stop somebody from doing that. So, I think in that earlier essay, a lot of this was sort of that kind of deep dive into the academic articles people have written about this. Got into a lot about, okay, different kinds of possibility and necessity and these sort of more esoteric things. But I think thinking about it a little bit more, what I sort of realized is, eh, uh, that's not really the main problem, like the main reason that so many people don't see this point. The main reason that so many people don't see this point is that they're in the grips of what the Australian philosopher Nicholas J.J. Smith calls the second time around fallacy, which is the conceptual mistake that you make when you're thinking about time travel, when you're imagining that there are essentially two drafts of 1932. There's the rough draft that doesn't have the time traveler in it, and then there's the revised draft that starts when the time traveler gets there. But that doesn't really work. That doesn't actually make sense.
I mean, it's probably also linked to people have mixed ideas, like intuitions about free will, some of which are compatibilist, but some of which are incompatibilist to
Mm-hmm.
libertarian. And I imagine it also connects to that.
Yeah, no, I think it does tie into it. I mean, I would argue that even libertarian free will uh, is
Oh yeah,
not
like
really.
actually worked out libertarian free will wouldn't, but like kind
Yeah,
of instinctive,
yeah, yeah,
intuitional
yeah, yeah,
one might.
exactly. I think a lot of people actually, at least some of their instincts about this stuff, and I agree with you that like I think most people have very mixed impulses on this. That like a lot of the way in a day to day way, a lot of the way that they think about free will and responsibility actually is compatibilist. Um, but I think sometimes, especially when they're thinking about more abstract issues, people will have these super duper incompatibilist intuitions, and actually, sort of the more like I actually think a lot of those super incompatibilist intuitions go way beyond what any like philosophical theory of libertarian free will
Right.
would demand, right? That it's not just that because the
I mean,
philosoph
you get questions on art such as philosophy, which is like, if free will is true, why can't I fly?
yeah, yeah, that's true, sure, yeah, uh, but like I also think as far as time that even though sorry, all right, even though the uh like what philosophers who advocate libertarian theories of free will, what they're really thinking of is um, these issues about causation. That the cause can't exactly the cause can't be something that's like outside of you or goes back before you. That you have to be originating your action in the right way, and that this the sequence of cause and effect leading up to your action can't preclude you from doing something that you don't do. Those issues about causation, I think, are really what are making libertarian philosophers tick. But I think a lot of ordinary people who have super libertarian intuitions will actually have it in ways that aren't really about causation at all. So, like, two non-time travel examples. Well, I mean, like, probably the main non-time travel example of that is people will worry, how could I have free will if God knows what I'm going to do before I do it? And honestly, if you think about it, like it's not obvious at all what the issue is with even libertarian free will and God knowing what you're going to do, or for that matter, just somebody with a crystal ball knowing what you're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, definitely if you're like at all physicalist, right? Because the universe where there's like a free from time, alienated God who lives outside the universe and knows what's going to happen in the universe, and the situation where he doesn't exist, every atom in those two universes can be exactly the same, right?
Yeah, I mean,
So
like,
it seems unclear what cause there could be for freedom not existing.
yeah, exactly. So, like, it could be that you have. I think this is what I think this is the same thing you just said. I just want to make sure um, that, like, you could have world A and world B, and world A and world B, they have identical time slices from the Big Bang up until um, dinner time tonight. And in world A, I get Mexican food tonight, and in world B, I get Chinese food tonight. Um, and again, we're imagining these as four-dimensional holes. Everything exists, past, present, future. It's but like if you say that those are both physically possible worlds, then we're already assuming indeterminism, and that's I mean, and we can assume that whatever it is that makes the difference between world A and world B is something that's really, really under my control in whatever, frankly, slightly poorly defined way. that you demand for some libertarian theory of free will, fine, assume all of that. It could still be the case that an all-knowing being would know whether we were living in A or B.
That isn't exactly the point I was making. The point to try to have a second go is to say that imagine the universe, imagine our universe as it is. Um, maybe it's a bit kind of issues about
Sure.
logical kind of problems of evil, but we can imagine that in this universe, there's say universe A, which is our universe, and then there's universe B, which is
Yep.
identical to our universe down to the atom,
Hmm.
atomic level, so on and so on. The universes are exact, but outside of one universe, in some kind of relationship to it, is a like an outside of time God.
Okay. Yep.
And in that case, he knows everything that happens and is going to happen in universe B. But
Right.
everything in universe B otherwise is identical to universe A. It doesn't seem clear to me why we would only be free in one of those universes. Like I just don't see why it would make a
Yeah, I
difference.
think that's a
If
slightly
everything is
different,
identical in both worlds.
way of making the same point that like it has. I mean, I mean, the sort of just to kind of bring it down to earth. I mean, I think the really simple way of making this point is just that. Well, I mean, just because you know that something happened, past tense, that doesn't mean that certainly doesn't mean you caused it to happen. And it,
Right? Does a certain knowledge of my past actions mean they were unfree?
yeah, exactly. Like you know, like it's true that you did such and such yesterday, and I know that you did such and such yesterday, but none of that means I caused you to do such and such yesterday, and none of it means that you couldn't have done something else instead yesterday, right? I mean, we all understand that just fine in the past tense, and so it's like very unclear why the future tense should be any different. You know, that if you have that God or just somebody with a crystal ball knows what you're going to do tomorrow, why that means that what you do tomorrow wasn't, really, really up to you in whatever way the libertarian demands causally. Those seem totally compatible to me. But I think a lot of people have the intuition that there's some sort of problem with free will about that. And
I
so,
mean, I think also while there's like mixed ideas about intuitions around compatibilism, incompatibilism, I think what definitely everyone instinctively is, and I think if you're not this, something very strange has happened. Like you would like philosophy podcast were put in your ear from birth or something. Is that everyone is a presentist
right.
intuitionally.
Yeah, that Julius Caesar doesn't exist anymore. Your future great great grandchildren don't exist yet. I think yeah, probably everybody does. Like start out thinking that like it's a very yeah, it'd be really weird if you just kind of intuited from the beginning that we live in a four-dimensional space-time block. Um,
Yeah, like the past is something which did exist but doesn't anymore, and the
uh,
future is something which will exist, and then the present is the stuff which exists.
yeah, I think if you go out to the street and just ask 100 people at random whether they would sign on to those statements, like probably a good 97 of them will. Um,
And
and
that is like a single present which exists everywhere,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
which
exactly.
which we
Ways
also
that's
definitely know is not true now.
incompatible with the special theory of relativity, right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think that because people assume that that's true, um, they oftentimes, when they're sort of confronted with the idea that it's not true, that they sort of tie that to the free will issue in ways that maybe don't quite stand up to scrutiny, but you can kind of see how they get there. And I think something parallel is true when people start thinking about time travel, because that's like a context where the weird shape of it sort of automatically comes with what it's easy to not realize about the world that we live in, which is that there are facts about what you will do that are sort of there waiting for you in a sense. Um, but I mean, the crucial point is that they're there waiting for you because that's what you decided to do. It's not that they're, when people think about fate or whatever, what they're thinking of is like, oh, no matter what I do, X will happen. But of course, that's not what we're talking about here. I mean, I kind of loosely use the word fatalism a couple times in talking about time travel here, but if we're going to be more precise, I mean, that's not at all fate in that sense, right? It's that X will happen because X is what you will decide to do.
Yeah.
If you decide to do something else, then not X would happen.
Exactly. Determinism is the idea that the future is fixed because of what we do, not in spite of what we do.
Yeah, right.
It's interesting. You'd have a list of movies in the article which are good at this. It's not very long.
It's not.
It's not very long at all.
Oh no, Stefan disappeared into the past just as he was about to list off. There we go.
Weird. Well, it's good you said something. I would have just because I clicked on the other tab to paste your article in again.
Oh,
I would have just kept blabbering on if you hadn't said something.
yeah, yeah. So I in the article, right? I mentioned some. Well, I spent a lot of time on one movie that I think it gets this right.
I've linked the wrong thing. I just linked your fucking Substack generally instead of the fucking thing.
Well, people
anyway,
go to see the article right at the top. Which is the Terminator, the first one. But yeah, then there's like a list of other ones that I can think of that also do it. And I'm sure
I think a good one is the Harry Potter example.
Yeah,
which is also kind of funny because J.K. Rowling is not known for someone who writes kind of tight plots where if you really think about them, all the elements make sense. That's famously not what she does. But in this case, she actually did.
Yeah, and Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is the movie of that is on the list, which seems funny to say, but it actually there is a small but crucial time travel subplot that actually is internally consistent time travel, and it's a Terminator style causal loop that the stuff that happens later causes the stuff that happens earlier, and all of that stuff,
and quite kind of artfully foreshadowed throughout the book in a way you don't notice when you're 12, but might now that kind of Hermione is somehow attending like more classes than there are hours for.
Yeah, exactly, and yeah, it's just like a kind of a goofy thing that doesn't make sense, but everybody's like, "Oh, don't worry about it."
Oh, the nerd girl's doing the impossible! Wow.
yeah,
No,
exactly.
actually, it's time travel.
Yes, and yeah, when you hear it, it makes sense, and yeah, as you say, it's actually very artfully done in the book, and faithfully reproduced in the movie. First Terminator movie is definitely on that list. There's a movie not a lot of people saw called Predestination, which is based on a Robert Heinlein story called All You Zombies. There's 12 Monkeys. And then the one that sounds funniest to say, but think about it, is the Bill and Ted movies actually have internally consistent time travel. And I'm probably, I think since I wrote this, one example of a movie that I've seen that should be on the list but is not was suggested to me, which is that my brother pointed out, Time Crimes. I think it's a Spanish movie from 2007. Also goes on
Time
there.
Crimes, great concept.
But yeah, other than that, I mean, like I said, I mean, I'm sure there's stuff I haven't seen. I'm sure there are ones that are that I have seen, besides Time Crimes that I'm just not thinking to put on the list. But it is a fairly short list. I mean, the vast majority of movies that involve time travel are not like this.
It's interesting time travel. I don't know if this is true. I was just trying to check it a little bit now, but it's one of those things which at least are attributed, which seem, time travel as an idea now seems like almost like just another thing you can have in a toolbox. Like you do need to change the story quite a bit for it, but it's not like there's plenty of time travel movies, right? And there's plenty of time travel books and so on. And some of them, like Harry Potter, just use it as kind of a side plot. But it is something which, as far as I'm aware, only came about in the late 19th century. And before that was not really a theme in fiction, even though there doesn't seem some kind of straightforward reason why it couldn't be.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I mean, I guess obviously it's not on the consistent time travel list, but I mean, there's like, I don't know, there's like the Avengers, there's time travel in there, quite prominently. There's like, so you do movies where supernatural or science fictiony stuff is happening. It's definitely gotten to a point where it's not like wildly uncommon to throw
Yeah, I
that
mean
in there
that's
somewhere.
very interesting. This stuff with kind of the Marvel universe, which is in the last few years completely mainstreamed the idea of like dimensions, of kind of like similar but distinct physical worlds which can be traveled between.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, like, is that? I mean, Marvel's certainly taken advantage of that like crazy. Uh, Trying to think how much
I mean,
they.
I think it came out of comic books wanting to constantly have the same cast of like 20 people fighting each other, but getting to a bit to the point of, well, surely one of them needs to kill the other.
Then you could have somebody from an alternate dimension. Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking like, certainly some kind of. I mean, multiverse stories have gotten like really common. Like just in the last couple of years, especially. Actually, it feels like there's a. I mean, you think okay, in Marvel, there's actually one of the few Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that I actually like, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which is you can it's like, yeah, it's a Marvel movie that it's made by the same guy as the Evil Dead that shows, and there's and then outside of that, I mean, there's like Everything Everywhere All at Once. Obviously, like I feel like there have been like several sort of big Hollywood movies with multiverses in them recently. There's actually something I'm doing a panel on it. Hey, next month. The
Really? What are you
It
doing?
is actually, yeah.
What are you doing a panel on?
Yeah, so it's so on let's see. Sunday, May 28th, I believe. Let me just pull up the description. Um, yeah, here we go. The best and worst of all possible worlds. Um, it's going to be with Paul Horwich, uh, who's philosopher of physics, and and a theoretical physics physicist, Tasneem Zera Hussein, um, and then me.
Damn, real shit.
The description is judging by the success of many novels and Hollywood films, we are attracted to the idea of multiple or alternate realities. It's not just in fiction and philosophy. Possible worlds theorists argue for a vast number of parallel worlds, some marginally different from ours, all of which are held to be real. But an increasing number of critics argue this is an extravagant fantasy that contend not only is there no evidence for such alternate possible worlds, but they're not even thinkable from our world. For we could make no sense of a universe outside of the universe. Should we see talk of alternate possible worlds as fundamentally misguided? Are they the metaphysical consequence of wanting to hold on to a realist account of language and make sense of modal logic? Well, instead, we should be adopting a radically different approach, or could we use other worlds to give us a better account of our own world and cast light on the deep puzzles of language and reality? And then there's a paragraph about what an eminent maverick everybody is, because that's how Hey Copy works.
I was going to say that the description there feels scarily sloppy, because it seems to conflate at least two of the big three ways that people talk about kind of multiverses. one which I don't think was really in there is the idea that there might be other like physical universes in our kind of spatial dimension.
Mm-hmm.
As in the sense that the universe, we can imagine our universe is kind of like an expanding sphere, and there
Yeah.
might be very, 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 very far away other expanding spheres.
Okay. Yep.
Um, and then there's the many world interpretation of quantum mechanics, which basically tries to take what the Schrodinger equation says, which is basically that you know a photon isn't in one place; it's in all these different places. The many worlds interpretation, instead of trying to slice off all those other possibilities like other models do, just says all these possibilities do actually happen. They just happen in different worlds. And then the possible worlds of philosophy,
Right.
which are just kind of the worlds of semantic imagination or whatever, which no
Yeah.
one apart from David Lewis, and maybe not even David Lewis, said were real.
Well, definitely David Lewis. There's so yeah, I mean, Lewis's view, which is
But even
I think
Lewis is like they're real but not actual.
right, but I think if you look at what he means by actual, I think he's pretty clear that actual on his way of
He's like here.
yeah, exactly. It's like
It's like a
actual
pronoun
is
basically.
exactly actual is an indexical like here or now. You know, here means the part of space I'm in. Now means the part of time I'm in. Actual means the universe that we're in. But he does go on and on about how they're just as physically real as as our universe, and supposedly there's no like yeah, I mean, it's inspired I think by Lewis thinking about the multiple worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, but it's very different because it's this is these are supposed to be completely causally unrelated
Right. 'Cause
to
well, and the other thing with many worlds is there might be like an infinite number of the many worlds and many worlds, or there might just be a lot of them, like an insanely large finite number. We don't really know. Well, it might not even be true. But regardless, that doesn't mean that everything happens in these worlds, because the things that
yeah,
photons get up to aren't that interesting. Photons are pretty boring, even if kind of they have
right.
an infinite degree of freedom. They don't end up doing much. Um, so even in the infinite many worlds, not all the stuff that happens, or even close to all the stuff that happens in all the possible worlds, happens.
Yeah, no, exactly. So in because the point of the Lewis one is essentially to make sense of talk of possibility and necessity and all of that stuff. That well, what it means to say that something that didn't happen possibly happened is that there is there is a real spatiotemporal universe that's I'm trying to be careful here, not use phrases like out there because these are
It's not out there, even if you go
it's
really,
not
really
out
far.
there. It's not spatial. It's not causally related to ours in any way. Um, but there is the spatiotemporally real universe in which it happened. Say that something's necessary is to say that it happened in all of the other universes, um, etc. And so this is only going to do the job that and this has various advantages. I mean, I don't I want to be careful about attributing this to Lewis, but just as a sort of because I don't know, I don't really remember off the top of my head exactly what Lewis said about truth, but I mean certainly one way to sort of see the motivation for this kind of view is that if you think that truth is correspondence to reality, um, that things are true because you've accurately described the way that reality is and not otherwise, uh, then well, okay, how about counterfactual statements? If I say, I don't know, you know, if Adolf Hitler had died in World War One, then the Third Reich never would have happened. Uh, Well, it doesn't. It feels like that's going to be either true or false. That we can.
Right. I mean, the concern, if anyone's wondering why there's a whole idea of possible worlds at all, is that if there isn't some kind of system of possible worlds, if we live in the only world, the only possible world, then the kind of pragmatics of normal human conversation, a large part of them stops making sense. Like if you say, if it was going to rain while I was walking to the shops, I would have got wet. If this is the only possible world, then that's false. And obviously,
Yeah,
that's a really
or at
weird
least
thing
it's
to
really
say.
unclear how we go about deciding whether it's true or false because it doesn't seem like well,
Yeah, maybe it's nonsense.
yeah, it's either false or nonsense because it seems like we're uh, one thing that it's not is an accurate description of the world if this is the only one. Uh,
I don't know if we're being slandered here or what the motivation for this comment is at all, but I really like the idea that possible worlds are neoliberal.
yeah, I like that there's the hashtag Nico House at the end of that. I don't believe Nico's actually said in that chat. I guess this is just like, just so you know, I'm a Nico House guy. Uh, yeah, awesome.
I brought up all this stuff about possible worlds because I was going to say that if you did travel back in time and you did kill Hitler, you would at that
uh,
point realize you're not in your possible world that you started off in.
yeah, exactly. Well, so this is why circling back. Yeah, and just real quickly, just to make sure everybody gets the idea, they have a Lewis's idea is that a counterfactual conditional, like, um, you know, if it rained while I was on the way to the shop, I would be wet right now. That's true as long as what he calls the closest possible worlds where the antecedent is true. The closest possible worlds where it rained while I was on my way to the shops are also worlds where I'm wet right now. Um, Closest meaning like most similar to ours or something like that. Although there's some headaches figuring out exactly how that works. But yeah, circling back to time travel, um, in the idea that you could go back to the past and do something that would then change the present is like this is kind of the key point, thinking about why most time travel movies don't make sense. There are an honorable few that do. I would like more of them. Uh, is that idea is deeply incoherent, and it's actually incoherent whether you think there's only one timeline or whether you think there are lots of them. Because if you're you're
There's
traveling,
no possible world in which Back to the Future makes sense.
yeah, exactly. The uh, So if you're traveling back to the actual past of our universe, then whatever you do there already happened by definition before you left on your trip to the past, and thus already had whatever impact it was going to have on the sequence of events leading up to the present and hence to what you did. So it's not there's so yeah, whatever effect your actions in the past are going to have on the present, they already had. So the idea that you could do something in the past that's going to lead to something different just doesn't make sense on the face of it. But even if you assume there are lots of timelines and you could travel not only through time but also interdimensionally, uh, and idea it's been around for a while. Got to point out, Marvel may have helped popularize it in the last couple decades, but I mean, you know, I don't know, the Mirror episode of Star Trek was in 1967, so it's been bubbling around. But if you could travel not only back in time but to alternate dimensions, okay, you could totally travel back to a world where a cross-dimensional time traveler killed Hitler in 1932, and you are
Yeah.
that cross-dimensional time traveler, and that's a lucky break for the inhabitants of that universe. But it's any distant cousins that I may have had who were had a bad time in the 30s and 40s. It certainly wouldn't have helped them. because it would have helped their counterparts in that universe,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't have helped them because that's that would all be taking place in that universe. There's the sort of deeply confused thing about the second time around conception of time travel is the idea that your the events that led up to the present didn't involve your trip back to time, but also what you're visited is not the past of an alternate universe, but the past of this universe. That those two really don't fit together.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I had something to say, but I forgot. But I was also holding in two things for the end,
Sure, go
um,
for it.
which were about drugs and Nick Land,
Yeah,
which
sounds
are
fun.
interrelated concepts. People have been talking a
My
lot.
my curiosity is piqued.
People in the chat have been talking a lot about drugs throughout the whole episode, um, for the apparent effects they can have on your perception of time. And one, I used to take this dissociative drug, which was similar to ketamine,
Okay.
but much kind of cleaner and less confusing. So it was like a kind of clear-headed experience of disassociation from your
I was just
body.
thinking, literally yesterday, I was texting with her friend Jason Miles, not about you, but about somebody else, and they and Jason said they seem like the kind of person who's done all the drugs, the ones that you and I have never heard of.
I did do all of the drugs, but I finished about 6 years ago, so
Fair enough.
I completed them all.
You you crossed the last one off your list. It's like, well, hell, I might as well be sober now.
No, I just joined the army.
Sure.
Um, but the point is, taking that drug as well as having a dissociative effect on the body is that it had a massive slowing down effect on your subjective experience of time. And not in the sense of becoming like a brain genius. Also, your brain was running very slowly. But it had this amazing effect where like you'd watch like the second hands on a clock tick and it'd be like, boom, boom. And it was just an amazing thing to watch. And I bring it up because subsequent to that, for at least a while, I don't know if it became permanent in the sense of either the effect became permanent and I stopped noticing or I went away, but it significantly slowed down my perception of time for months afterwards,
Oh wow. Yeah.
which was cool. I enjoyed it. I
Sheesh.
was for it. Um, where does one acquire ketoclean? Well, this was during the great renaissance of British research chemicals, where UK law used to be, and I think this is how the law is throughout the world normally, is basically all substances are legal unless they're illegal,
Okay. Yep. Sure.
which basically means people can just make new drugs, and until the government gets around to banning them, you can take them and possess them and so on, and sell them even. But the UK changed the law so that everything is preemptively banned and
Okay.
things have to be legalized.
Got it.
Um, so now this whole thing was destroyed by that. I can't even remember what it was called. I could probably find it if I tried really hard, and maybe Americans will still be able to buy it. And the other thing was about Nick Land.
I remember Salvia when that first came out, and uh, I don't know if they ever got around to making that illegal or whatever, but it first came out and it was the same kind of thing that that it was legal because nobody had bothered to criminalize it. Um, which and
Yeah, because it was like it was like hallucinogenic paint thinner.
yeah, I mean the nice thing about it, I mean the thing you said about altering your perception of time was it months sounds nightmarish to me. I think the the awful thing about hallucinogens is normally that it's like they you know uh not not that this is a regular or recent experience, but that you want them to be over long before they are.
That's
Uh
kind of the only drug I miss is nitrous oxide, which is a really amazing thing. Of you take one a balloon or whatever, um, and you wink out of the universe, and then literally 30 seconds later you're sober.
Yeah, so I mean, the salvia thing wasn't quite that, but it was like it was a little bit like taking one of the big kid hallucinogens, but just for like half an hour, then it's done.
Right, because with
And
LSD, you can be having fun, but then like 4 hours in, you're like, well, I'm tired now, but I
yeah,
can't be tired.
yeah, well, right. You feel both tired and completely incapable of going to sleep, which is the worst feeling in the world. I remember Philip K. Dick says somewhere that LSD you can experience not an eternity but 2 or 3 consecutive eternities. But I do remember that um, when I was first looking it up, one of the things that whatever website I was looking at listed as possible effects of salvia was apparent time travel, and I have to say, I never experienced that, but the few times that I used salvia, me and my friend I'd do it with, that was always how we'd like introduce, like, "Hey, you want time travel tonight?"
Has someone made a movie about
I don't know.
that?
There's a good so there's a TV show called Man Seeking Woman. It's like this sort of surreal, kind of lots of literalized metaphors, sort of TV show about dating and heartbreak and stuff like that. But they have like in the first episode, mild spoiler, the main character is going to a party and his ex girlfriend is there with her new boyfriend who's literally Hitler. It's like, how can you date Hitler? It's like, oh, okay, you're just jealous, no, but he's literally Hitler. And I remember there was an episode of Man Seeking Woman where there was they time travel because there's some like uh, time travel pills that are just being sold at a drugstore.
Effects may vary.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, the other thing was about Nick Land.
Yeah, oh, yeah, Dick Land by all means, yes.
Nick Land was recently posting about, and it's one of those ones where you sometimes forget how insane Nick Land is, because he alternates from just being racist, which is quite
Sure.
like it's funny that he believes in kind of like machine gods, infinite intelligence, and so on. But also he's really racist, which is like surely when the machine guns, even if Africans really had 80 IQ, it seems irrelevant in face of the machine gods, right? Who are going to have 1 billion IQ. But anyway, um, the he alternates between kind of being racist, saying stuff about AI, and often the stuff about AI is relatively connected to what's happening.
Hmm.
Um, But then sometimes you post stuff and you realize you are completely and utterly insane, like insaner than just so absolutely fucking mental. And the thing that triggered this was he was talking about how the basilisk, as in the future AI
Hmm.
god, edited the King James Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is written in
Awesome.
the 17th, which is written in the 17th century.
Okay, so the future AI guy could time travel.
Well, I think the point about future AI gods is that all that stuff becomes a bit pointless, irrelevant. It just kind of, and I think Nick Land for a while
No, I'm
has
just trying to like literally suss out what he's saying. Like what's the mechanism by which the
no,
future AI guy.
yeah, yeah. The point is Nick Land doesn't, I think, hasn't for a while, and you can see it also in his early writings when he's talking about garbage time running out and stuff like that. It's not really ever believed in like a single unitary causal goes in one direction timeline.
Okay,
But now, as an insane old man, I think he just doesn't believe in what unidirectional time travel at all. So why can't the basilisk edit the King James Bible? Because time doesn't really exist.
sure, why not?
It's true. He's not a racist. He's a hyper racist.
Yeah, so please be respectful of his self-description. Yeah, honestly, I was never really that interested in reading Nick Land, just sort of like my experience of people who peddle uh, edgy intellectual dark enlightenment is that usually there's not much there when you get into it, but
Yeah, I mean
they
I did read the Dark Enlightenment and it wasn't that interesting. Um, it's just kind of it was basically just Hobbes.
all right. Yeah, I mean, just kind of read Hobbes. That's um, probably a better use of your time. But although all this was before I knew about the future Aegon reading the King James Bible, that actually sounds halfway interesting. I sort of want to read that now.
Right. Yeah, I mean you've heard of Roko's Basilisk, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Because that only makes sense if you believe in timeless decision theory,
Right.
which
Kurt,
is a
I see in the chat. I love Donnie Darko. Honestly, it's one of my all-time favorite movies, but that is not a model of time travel that makes sense.
well, it's meant to be hallucinogenic or whatever, right? It's not really
Yeah,
meant
yeah.
to.
Well, it works in context for exactly that reason. It like the atmosphere. Yeah, I think it works, but it's not. I also think that like if you sit down, as I said in the essay, at the like the Bruce Willis says in
Right, you
Looper,
try to make the
with the
diagram.
straws trying to diagram it all out, then I don't know if it'll pass the test.
But yeah,
Anyway,
yeah, the Udowski people believe in timeless decision theory, which is like doesn't really make sense and is wrong and useless, but doesn't mean what like Nick Land means, which is basically time doesn't exist.
definitely more fun.
Well, do you remember if you watched that creepy YouTube thing where they talk about time not existing?
No.
Okay, well, I won't try and go on about it. We can probably
Yeah,
just
yeah.
knock it
Just
off.
just send me
Wait,
a
wait,
link.
wait. What's next week?
All right. So next week, unless we pre-record, we'll have to figure this out. You and I might not be talking, but do have an essay planned for next week. I was so to give this a little bit of context. I recently read Megan Phelps Roper's book Unfollow, which because I was watching the most recent ContraPoints video, um, and Phelps Roper comes up quite a bit in the video, and she comes up in the context of Natalie disagreeing with some of her current positions, but in the context of setting it up, she described this book and said it was a pretty good book, and I was intrigued by her description, and I read it, and it's about Phelps Roper growing up in and eventually questioning and leaving the worst church in the world,
Oh,
probably the
that woman.
yeah, probably the worst church that you could like honestly just about the most loathsome church you could come up with short of like human sacrifice in the church basement or something. The
Produced
Westboro
some
Baptist.
great photography though.
And it's a really interesting book. I mean, honestly, it's kind of a fascinating like look at just growing up in that and it all seeming normal to you, and just sort of very gradually starting to question it. But one thing I started to think about more as I read it is the disconnect between these people's view of the world and more normal theists who agree with a lot of their premises,
Mm.
um, but come to this wildly different conclusion. And it occurred to me that, look, I would prefer people to not be monsters, even if that makes them a little bit less conceptually coherent. So I'm just as happy that it's such a minority position. But it did occur to me while I was writing it that there is something that's actually a bit more internally consistent about
Right. I mean, when we point out, the Christians they don't follow all the rules in Leviticus, we don't want them to start,
please don't start.
which is kind of the whole kind of useless thing of pointing out hypocrisy.
Yeah, because at best you're only halfway there, right? You have to like if you point out that two things that somebody believes are inconsistent with each other. Not just, I mean, hypocrisy would be they're acting in a way that's inconsistent with the belief, but same principle,
Right,
right?
like maybe the Nazis were the most kind of honest and conceptually consistent anti-Semitic organization ever because they actually did it.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't mean that I would prefer, I'll take a little bit of inconsistency and no genocide if those are my options. But it is interesting to think about the respect in which these people are a little bit more consistent when they think about sort of when they think about all the horrible things that happen in a world that, according to them, and also according to so many of their detractors, is governed by an all-powerful being who gets to decide at every moment what happens. That in some way their approach to this is actually more internally consistent. So the title of the essay next week is going to be "The Westboro Baptist Solution to the Problem of Evil."
Cool. Yeah, I'm interested in reading that because I've got no idea what it is.
Yeah, well,
I mean, from their public stuff, it seems that their point is that the world is very evil. Though I guess maybe the point is it's caused by FAGs
well, the world,
and US
sure,
soldiers.
yeah. Well, the world is very. I mean, the people that populate the world are very evil, but the outcomes are very good.
Right.
Is everybody else has this problem of how to reconcile the fact that it's an awful thing when this stuff happens, with the belief that the world is, universe is governed by a being that could stop it from happening. They don't have that problem. So I think we'll leave that there for today, and possibly if we could pre-record or reschedule or something, possibly chat about that. But otherwise, if not, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
I didn't play the intro in the intro, so I'm going to play it now.
Play it as the outro.
Unsurprisingly, that was not our most viewed show.
Sure.
The surprising thing was,
We've definitely stopped recording, right? Because it still says live.
yeah, it was definitely stopped.
Okay.
The surprising thing was I thought it would be mostly GTAA people, but actually it was slightly in favor of GTAA. But we were on for a sec. Oh no, we are on. Of course
Yeah,
we're on.
I really thought
Sorry.
so. It still very persistently said live, so